This presentation is Proactive Behavior Interventions, and the person speaking today is Laura O'Rourke. I have a Master's of Science in Special Education, and I am a board-certified behavior analyst as well as a licensed mental health counselor, and I will be doing the presentation today. Welcome. So today we're going to talk about positive behavior supports, and I'd like to talk to you about what we know about behaviors. People tend to communicate with their behaviors, and when we talk about behaviors, what we're talking about is things that we can see, behaviors that we can measure, things that we can see other people doing are what we call behaviors. Those behaviors can be positive or negative, but they're always a form of communication. When someone's in a crisis and they are feeling anxious or fearful, or there's something going on that's interfering with their ability to process, that's going to affect their communication. And in a crisis, a person's communication is going to decrease as the crisis increases. Another interesting piece is, regardless of the behavior that we see, there's a reason for everything a person does. And so we really want to look at what is the underlying reason for a behavior and what is that person trying to communicate. Another very interesting piece is that the reason that the person is using those behaviors, if you break it down and think about that behavior from the individual's perspective, it oftentimes is very understandable, and it makes sense once you understand what they were trying to communicate. And we need to keep that in mind when we're dealing with behaviors. Teaching more effective and appropriate communication strategies will decrease problem behavior. And what this is saying is that when we see a behavior that we consider problematic, or that's challenging for us, or that doesn't fit with what we want that individual to be doing, we need to teach them a better way to communicate their needs. And the way that we can teach that is by understanding, what are they trying to say? What is that reason for the behavior, the underlying cause for the behavior? What are they trying to communicate? And then providing them a different voice to communicate that need. So as I said, behavior is anything a person does that you can see and that you can measure. So there are positive behaviors that we want to see increased. We'd like that individual to do more of certain behaviors. And then sometimes there's behaviors that we'd like to see less of, that we want to decrease. Our environment, when we're talking about the environment during this presentation, is all of the physical surroundings in which a person exists. So that may be the trees, it might be the chairs, it might be the building being hot or cold, it might be the vehicle in which the person is being transported. All of these pieces are part of the environment and can be considered as part of a comprehensive positive behavior plan. Setting events are events that occur that we don't have very much control over, but they also contribute to the behaviors that we end up seeing. These things might include the weather, sleep patterns. Did the person sleep well the night before? If they're sick or they're on different medications, medication changes can be a big setting event for behavior changes. Also, in the weeks before somebody becomes ill, you might see a behavior change. Home environment and family issues might be setting events that anticipate a behavior that may arise. For example, if you have parents fighting at home, or you have a sick sibling, or there's some other family change or family dynamic that's affecting a person at home, you might see behaviors in the school. Another setting event is hunger or thirst. If someone is hungry or they're thirsty, or they have some other bodily need, they might need to use the restroom, that can be a setting event for seeing behaviors. And finally, trauma. If a child has been abused or neglected or has experienced or witnessed trauma in the past, that can be a setting event for behaviors that you might see now. Triggers are things that happen in someone's environment immediately before the behavior occurs. These are the things that trigger that behavior and kind of set it off. And when we're looking at triggers and we're trying to identify what those are, the questions that you want to ask are, who was involved? Who were the people there right before the behavior happened? What occurred? What was the event? What was the activity? What was happening in the environment right before the behavior occurred? When did it occur? Was there a specific time of day or a specific component of an activity? Was it right before a transition, or was it during a preferred activity? Those are questions about when that you could ask that might identify triggers. And where? Did it occur outside or inside, or in the classroom or in the bedroom? Where did the behavior occur is also a trigger that we can identify that can help us figure out why the behavior is happening. So there are certain things that we can do to prevent challenging behaviors. One of the things that we can do is to stay positive. Look at what we would like to teach and what we want that individual to learn, rather than focusing on the problem behavior. We need to know our setting events, because our setting events are often things that, although we don't have any control over, having the knowledge of what's going on can often help us be more compassionate to what is triggering that behavior and the environmental conditions that might contribute to a behavior occurring. And sometimes we can help affect those setting events by being proactive and positive in preventing those behaviors from happening by changing certain setting events. For example, if someone isn't sleeping well, we can help to try to figure out a way to get them to sleep better. And once they are sleeping better, we'll see better behaviors. We have to find the function. And when I'm talking about function, we need to know the why. Why is the behavior happening? And we'll talk about this more later in the presentation. Another tool is to write down your observations and write down what those setting events, those triggers, the who, what, when, where, and how that occurred. And writing those facts down can help us prevent challenging behaviors and identify the factors that contribute to challenging behaviors. Having clear expectations in the environment for the individual, predictability, and being able to understand what's going on in the environment, reducing that unknown, can often be effective in preventing challenging behaviors. Everyone doing the same thing every time, all of the time, can help that individual understand what intervention is happening, and everyone having that same path, being consistent with one another, will often highlight whether an intervention is working or not working. And then we can make changes if it's not, or we can continue along the path to teach that child if everyone's consistent. Using visual aids is often very effective in preventing challenging behaviors. Adding additional communication tools can help reduce the anxiety and reduce the communication deficits an individual might be experiencing. And visual aids are often helpful in communicating those needs. We also want to have rules for following positive behaviors, expectations that we want to teach the individual, and then practice with the individual so that they can learn how to use the positive behaviors in the future. And setting those rules up front and communicating them clearly is extremely effective in preventing challenging behaviors. We also want to plan for prevention of that problem behavior. So we want to have something written and something that we've developed ahead of time so that when we do see different setting events or different triggers or different behaviors that arise, We already have a plan for what we're going to do to address those behaviors instead of relying on our gut instinct or whatever we can think of in the moment. It's often very effective to have a plan that's been thought out and communicated with the team ahead of time so that people understand what's expected of them. We want to stay positive. One of the things that we can do is figure out what is going to motivate the individual. What does that individual like? Do they like things that move? Do they like to move? Do they like watching activities go by? Do they like being outside? Do they like being cuddled up in a warm blanket? Do they like pressure on their bodies? Do they like visual stimulation? There's all sorts of things that you can find that an individual will be motivated to work for, but also things that they prefer. And you can do an assessment to find the things that an individual likes. When you're doing an assessment to find individual likes and preferences, oftentimes it's helpful to try out new things and to provide them with some time with different toys or activities and see if that's something that they show interest in. Another way that you can look at finding what someone likes is by looking at the different systems of your body: touch, taste, smell, sight, and looking at all of those components and trying to figure out if there's pieces that an individual likes or doesn't like. You also want to find ways to build the things that an individual prefers and likes into their daily routine, so that even if they're having an activity that they may not enjoy, there are components that they do enjoy. For example, if I have an individual who really does not like to sit at the table and listen to a story, I might have them hold on to a favorite toy as long as they stay quiet. And then they can interact with that favorite toy while they're listening, which helps make it more enjoyable. Think about when you're in the waiting room of a doctor's office and you're trying to sit there and wait. What do you do to keep yourself occupied and to enjoy the waiting period? Do you look at a magazine? Do you listen to music? Do you think about different things? Do you read a book? These are things that help that waiting go by faster. And even though waiting isn't a preferred activity for you, you can do things that make it a little bit easier. We also want to ask, how can I make myself fun? How can I make me the person that this individual wants to interact with and wants to be around? So think about making sure that you smile and that you're using eye contact, that you're the one that brings the fun activities. You want to make sure that you pair yourself as a preferred individual. You also want to look at how you can make activities more fun for the individual. And then how do we clearly communicate all of these things to that individual? Are we programming to make sure that the activity is communicated clearly and that the individual knows that we're working to stay positive and to use preferences within their routine? When we look at behaviors, we see that they're just the tip of the iceberg, the tip of the issue. There are certain things that will contribute to behaviors. So when we look at it, a behavior is what we see. Just as in this snow-capped mountain, that's the tip. That's what the snow covered, but there's all sorts of underlying issues that are going on that can contribute to those behaviors that we see. One of those items is the setting events that can help contribute to the behavior that we see. And while we can't see what happened before they came to our location today, we know something may have occurred that changed the likelihood that they will have a behavior. Triggers are also things that can contribute to a behavior occurring. When we're looking at people with autism, having rigid patterns of behavior and repetitive patterns of behavior can often contribute to a behavior that we might see. Social skills deficits are also contributing factors that may show a behavior when the social skills deficit is is something that causes frustration. We might see a behavior that occurs because of that. And finally, inability to communicate well is often a contributing factor that results in a behavior that we see. The behaviors are just the way that the individual knows best to communicate what they need in the most efficient way. And so teaching how to communicate in a more efficient way that's more reliable and more successful will help that individual learn that they don't need to use those behaviors anymore to communicate their needs. There's a better way. So in conclusion about talking about the contributions of behaviors, if we know what contributes to those problem behaviors, we can find the tools to teach an appropriate way to communicate that message and to make sure that that individual knows and practices those appropriate ways so that it becomes more comfortable to use the new appropriate behavior than it is to use the challenging behavior. So let's talk about function. Function is why. Why is that behavior happening? What is motivating that individual? Where is it coming from? What is its purpose? There are 4 functions of behaviors that are often recognized when we're looking at why a behavior occurs. The first one is attention seeking or social needs. The individual is looking to gain social feedback from another person. Escape or avoidance is another function. This often happens when a person is looking to get out of something that is non-preferred or to avoid something that they find aversive. A third function is sensory or automatic or physical needs. We often see this behavior when an individual needs to get some sort of input. We might also see it if there's pain. Oftentimes the individual will be alone when they're doing that behavior. And finally, tangible is another function of behavior. The person wants an item or an activity or a physical, tangible thing, and that is the function of the behavior. So let's go into the function of attention a little bit more. You'll notice that when you see the function of attention, that behavior stops or is not present when there's one-to-one interaction. So if a person is alone and they're having the behavior and then the teacher walks into the room and the behavior stops, that may indicate that the function could be attention. Another possible way to notice is that the behavior increases when the client or the individual is left alone or when the individual is not being paid any attention. So you'll see this when they're trying to look to see if you're paying attention to them, look to see if you're watching, or when they have somebody that's with them, the behavior is often reduced. And then when they're alone or in a group setting, the behavior may increase. You might see the individual trying to get a reaction out of you, trying to see, what will you do if I try this? They may laugh or make big productions out of behavior. For example, a child who stands on the table and waves their body around so that you'll come over and say, please get down. And then they think it's wonderful, the show that they put on to make sure that they have your attention. The child may also look like they enjoy being reprimanded or when they get into trouble. Let's think about that for a second. If you have someone who's in a group and they're used to being the troublemaker, and every time they get into trouble and they have a behavior, the person will come and pull them aside and sit there and talk to them about what happened and why did they do that and what are they going to do with you. But guess what's happening with that individual? They're also getting a lot of social attention with someone one-on-one. So if they really need that attention and they're not getting it in different ways, they might act out or have a behavior because that's the only way to get the attention. So they might seem to be saying, look at me. And what we need to do with people who have a function of attention-seeking behaviors is we need to teach them a better way to get that attention. Another piece that's difficult oftentimes for the caregivers is that we have to make sure that we are providing positive attention for the things that they're doing that are good and positive. And that's a little shift, because you have to remember to catch them being good rather than noticing them when they're having the misbehavior. When we're looking at an individual who has a function of escape or avoidance, we might see that that individual wants to get out of work. They don't enjoy doing schoolwork or doing things that are difficult for them. The behavior might stop or isn't present when they're left alone or when they're doing things that they enjoy, things that are preferred activities. You might see the behavior happen during a non-preferred activity or when they're asked to do something, particularly something that they don't like. They may seem to be saying, "Leave me alone," or "I don't want to do this." And these are components that might indicate a function of escape or avoidance. And what we want to do with escape and avoidance is we want to make sure that we make it easier to do that non-preferred activity. And we also want to teach that the behavior is not the way that the activity is going to end. When we look at the function of automatic or physical, we might see behaviors that occur at any time, even when the individual is left alone. They don't need another person involved in order to do that behavior. That's often the biggest characteristic of automatic or physical functions of behaviors, is they don't need anyone around in order to maintain the reasons for why they're doing that behavior. You'll oftentimes see that that behavior is repetitive. You might see a person who's waving their hands in front of their face. The person might walk on a specific line every single time they're going down that path. The individual might rock back and forth, or they might look like they're staring off at space and watch things falling from trees. The behavior will appear to occur or increase when the client or the individual does not feel well, is in pain, or is uncomfortable. Oftentimes, the function of automatic starts when a person has a change in their physical or medical well-being that will contribute to that behavior starting. And then they realize that there's something good that comes out of it, and they do the behavior more often. So it might feel good to them to do that behavior. It might feel good to rock. It might feel better to hit your head instead of the headache that is hurting you. It's at least a different sensation than the one that's the headache. So oftentimes we really want to look at the medical factors that might be underlying the behavior and rule out any of those medical issues. Oftentimes we want to look at ears and throat and headaches and see if there's anything going on with pain or with sickness that might be contributing to that behavior that's going on. Our function of tangible, we'll see when a behavior occurs when an item is removed, an item that's preferred or that an individual really enjoys. Think of the individual who has their favorite toy and they love that favorite toy, but then when they have to do their work or they have to do their chores, that toy gets set aside. Does that individual have a behavior to show, "I don't like that"? Maybe that behavior is screaming. Maybe that behavior is hitting. Maybe that behavior is running out of the room because now their favorite toy is gone. So we might see the behavior occur when that preferred item is removed. We'll also maybe notice that the behavior occurs when you or another person has something that the individual wants and they feel like the only way to get it is to have the behavior. You'll see that behavior occur in order to get access to that preferred item, or the behavior stops as soon as that preferred item is in their hands. You might also see that the behavior occurs when an individual has nothing to do or the task is too easy. They might be bored and they might need more activities or more challenges. So what happens when you just don't know, after all of these descriptions of these functions, you still can't tell. It might be attention and escape, or maybe it could be automatic, or I just don't know. Maybe they're trying to get that favorite item or that favorite food, and I can't figure it out. The great thing is that we have an answer for that. We just need to remember our ABCs. And in behavior analysis, A's stand for antecedents. Antecedents are the things that occur before a behavior. So we want to answer the following questions. What is happening before the behavior occurs? Who is around when it occurs? When does it happen? Where does it occur? And we also want to look at what, who, when, where does it not occur? Remember, knowing when a behavior isn't happening is just as important in figuring out the function as identifying the times when it is happening. The B in the ABCs stands for behavior. And when we're looking at writing down what the behavior is, we want to write down what does it look like. And when we're defining it, we want to make sure that that definition is something that everybody can understand, so that when they look at that written sentence about what the behavior looks like, it doesn't matter who comes in, everybody knows that that's what it looks like. For example, I want everyone to think about the behavior of hitting. So think about hitting in your own mind, and if you'd like, you can write down what you think hitting looks like, and you can discuss with your group and pause this video to brainstorm different behaviors that you're looking at and what you think that they would look like. Now I want you to think about the definition of hitting from a person who is 1 foot away from another person and who uses their open hand to strike the other person in the cheek. Now, is that what you were thinking when you were thinking of the definition of hitting? I bet many of you were thinking of a different definition. What if I told you that that behavior only occurs once every 2 months? So we also want to know how often it's happening. What if I told you that that behavior is only happening and it doesn't even hurt, or it's just a little bit of a brush against the other person's cheek? That's going to identify how intense it is. And we also want to know how long does it last. There's a big difference in hitting when it's one time, where it's more of a brush against the cheek, versus 18 times in 2 minutes. There's a big difference in the duration of how long it lasts. And all of these pieces, we want to make sure that we write that down and that we're describing them in a way that everyone knows exactly what we're looking at and exactly what we're talking about. So we want to have consistent plans for what it looks like, how often it occurs, how intense it is, and how long it lasts. And the reason that we want to have a very clear consensus on the behavior is because when we're writing it down and as we're measuring our progress, we need to know those pieces, and we need to be very clear that the team all understands what we're talking about, so we know if we're improving or not improving that behavior. Consequences is our C. And consequences are the things that happen after the behavior. So we want to look at how did other people respond? What was going on after the behavior occurred? Does the individual have any physical effects? Is there a change in expectations for the individual? Did they get out of work, or did they get something that they were really looking forward to? Or did the teacher or the parent come into the room and start talking to them? Does the individual get anything? Or does the individual avoid something that they were looking that wasn't preferred? So writing all of the consequences down can also help identify the function of the behavior. When we're looking at tracking behaviors, we want to make sure that we identify what's happening. One of the ways that you can track behaviors is by time. For example, if I'm looking at the date and I write the date down as today, I might have a behavior chart that looks like this. So our individual here has 3 different behaviors that we're trying to address. One is hitting, one is leaving their seat, and one is yelling. And of course, there's a separate program or written document that defines all 3 of these behaviors so that everyone knows exactly what is meant by those 3 definitions. And in this case, we have a time slot where each time that the behavior occurs, we document it. And we document what time it occurred. And today, it looks like this individual had 4 different episodes of behaviors. The first one occurred at 8 o'clock in the morning and had hitting and yelling. At 9:45 in the morning, there was an episode where they were yelling and leaving their seat. At 11:42 in the morning, they were leaving their seat and yelling. And at 3:58 in the afternoon, they were yelling. So there's a few things to look at. One of the items is what's going on at the beginning of the day that might be contributing to that hitting behavior, because we didn't see it the rest of the day. We also might want to notice that there are less behaviors that occur at the end of the day, but that yelling seems to occur on and off throughout the day. So we might want to do some more analysis of what's going on with yelling. Leaving seat, I wonder what are the activities that are happening at 9:45 and 11:42 that might be contributing to the individual wanting to get something or wanting to get out of something that's in that seated area. And what's going on at the beginning and end of the day that is making that individual not leave their seat? Are they already walking around? Or is that a time that they really enjoy the activity at the beginning and end of the day? These are all things we want to look at and find those patterns of behavior. Another way that we can track behaviors is by counting them up. So for example, on Monday, June 2nd, 2013, we have the behavior of biting, hitting, and crying. And this is a nice way to just tally up how many behaviors you're seeing of an individual so that we can get a count. So as the behavior occurs throughout the day, then we're going to just mark a 1 or mark a dash so that we know how often it happens. And then over time, as you continue to build the data on each of the days, you can average it out or you can analyze what's going on Mondays. Is biting always happening more often on Mondays than Tuesdays? Or is Thursday a really difficult day? What is going on with Thursday? Why is Friday such a wonderful day? What's happening and what can we do to replicate what's happening Friday so that we see more success with behaviors? Once you've written down all of the information and you've studied it and you've come up with a really good guess of what the function of the behavior is, that's when we can plan for success. Now remember, if the only way to plan for positive behaviors, to teach a different way to communicate, is if you really understand the function. That's why it's so important to take the time to find out why the behavior is occurring, because that's how we're going to fix the behavior. For example, let me tell you a story. An individual that I knew had the behavior of running out of the room. And we tried to find all sorts of different reasons, and we kept trying to give the individual water because we really thought that they were thirsty. And we kept making sure that that individual had enough water to drink and had enough to do and had lots of preferred activities that were at their center. So we tried to make sure that everything that they were doing was really, really enjoyable, but the behavior continued to persist. And we thought that maybe they were hungry, so we gave them food. And then the behavior continued to persist. So then we made sure that the individual had lots of people around and lots of positive attention and playing games and singing songs. But the behavior continued and they were running out of the room. And then we tried to make sure that we changed the work that they were doing so that it was easier and that it was enjoyable, what the activities that they were doing. Yet the behavior persisted. When we started writing everything down, we tried to figure out what was going on. And what we noticed was that the behavior needed to use the restroom and was running out of the room because they were trying to communicate, please help me, I need to use the restroom, I need to go to the bathroom. And we didn't understand what they were trying to communicate because that individual didn't have the words and didn't have the ability to communicate effectively with us that they really needed to use the restroom. Once we figured that out, we noticed that that person didn't have the running out of the room behavior anymore because we were taking them on a regular schedule. And at the same time that we were taking them to the restroom on a regular schedule, we also added a way that they could ask for the bathroom. We added a picture where if they gave us a picture or touched the picture of the bathroom, that we could then go to the bathroom. And what happened was we eliminated the running out of the room behavior because we taught the individual a better way to get their needs met. So that's what we need to do to identify the function, is we need to write down all of those variables and really identify, why is that behavior happening? What is the individual trying to communicate? And that's how we can plan for success. One of the ways that you can plan for success is modifying the environment. Let's look at these two pictures. In the picture on the left side of the screen, we see that the desks are all facing the teacher and that there's a very specific amount of people that are supposed to be in the room. We see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 chairs. So there are 11 people that are in the classroom at any given time. There's also some visual aids in the back of the classroom that show the calendar and show what's going on with the students and what their responsibilities are each day. We also see a schedule for the day, but also a monthly schedule and a monthly calendar. I like to see the bins that are up on the left side of that picture, that there's a place for everything and there's a designated spot where each of the activities are located so that people know what to do and where to find them. That's very important. On the right side, we see that there is an assumption that people should be sitting in a group, as seen by all of the tables that are around, and that the chairs are facing each other. So this is an area that we would know what to do because we walk into a room and you sit at an open table. You might sit at your specific group, or you might see what you need. It also looks like this could be a place where you eat, as seen by the napkins. So again, you walk into this room and you know the expectation just by looking at the environment and how it's set up. That's a very good way to help prevent behaviors, by making sure that the environment is set up so that the individual that comes in knows what to expect just by observing the environment. And they know what to do with their behaviors, and they know how to behave just by what they see. So with room arrangement, we want to have clearly defined spaces. We also want to make sure that there's enough space between individuals. One good tip for having enough space is you want to be an arm's length away from each other. And that way you can eliminate many behaviors that occur from people being too close to one another, particularly if you have behaviors that affect other individuals, such as hitting or pulling hair, or maybe touching people that don't want to be touched. Those are different behaviors that just by being 2 to 3 feet and arm's length away is going to really help eliminate that behavior, because it causes more effort for you to have to get up out of your seat and move farther towards an individual to have that behavior. So because it's more effort, it may just help prevent behaviors from occurring because it's just not as easy. We also want to make sure that weapons are out of reach. And that could be pencils, it could be papers, it could be the lamp, it could be a piece of furniture. We want to make sure that the things that an individual might use that could harm themselves or others are out of reach. Another thing that can be helpful is by minimizing and limiting distractions, making sure that a person's focus is where it should be. Other ways that we can modify the environment are by structuring our activities so that there's defined places for things, that there are clear beginnings and ends, and that it's organized so that the person knows exactly what to do and where to go in order to get their needs met. Let's look at this picture in the bottom of the left side of the screen. If you'll notice, this classroom or this room has been set up to have stations. So that first station is a little area where the person can relax, and it's meant for one person, as seen by there's only one place where somebody could be. So obviously, there's not going to be 4 or 5 people in that little corner. Then you move on to the little table with the 2 chairs and the rug, and that space is clearly meant for some sort of one-on-one interaction with another person. If you notice, there are games set up behind that on that shelf, and so maybe that's our activities or our games table. But again, you know that there are 2 people that are meant to be there, and what you're probably going to be doing is playing a game. Then if you move toward the back of that room, there's a picture on the wall that says that it's a computer area. And then look, there's a computer there. So we know that that must be the computer time area where the individual is sitting and playing on the computer. Then you move over and you see that there are 2 chairs, and you can assume that there are also 2 chairs on the other side. This is where maybe there's a group of 4 doing a group activity. You can also see that there are bins and shelves that have very clearly defined areas, that the areas have pictures that identify what that area is labeled, that the materials are readily available for the location that that section is, and that everything has a place and has a purpose in this room. Let's look at the picture on the right. This is a library. And what I like about this is that while you're looking at all of the activities, if you have a specific goal for a certain subject matter or a certain ability level, it's already been categorized out and separated and grouped into what's most appropriate for that subject. So we see pictures labeled on the bins that define what is supposed to be in that bin. And we also notice that the books that are part of that bin have been matched to that picture so that people know what is on that picture is also in that bin. And having those clearly defined places for things can help eliminate the questions and the behaviors that might occur from being unclear with the expectations. Another way that you can modify the environment is by using schedules and routines. What we want to do is make sure that the individual knows that there's a pattern, knows that there's a predictable way to behave, and that we eliminate the unclear expectations or the questions of, what am I supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to be behaving? We want to make sure that we have those questions answered in a preventative way so that an individual does not need to use an inappropriate behavior to get that clarification. We want to make sure that the individual knows where to go, what to do, and when to do it. And we also want to very much make sure that somebody's independence is the end goal, because they might not always have us. So anytime we're teaching communication strategies, we want to make sure that it's something that is at least on the path towards an individual using that communication strategy all by themselves without any help from anyone else. So always teaching towards independence is a really important goal. So when you look at the pictures here, we see 3 different kinds of schedules and routines. The picture on the left is a monthly calendar. So this might be for an individual who doesn't need a lot of guidance, but just might need some basic tips for the day on what's happening. And they understand what it means to go to the museum, or what it means when there's someone's birthday, or what it means when they're going swimming. They understand what those pieces mean, and they know to follow those schedules, and they're able to understand time for a day where they might need just that. Think of the calendars that you use every day, or that when you're looking about, what does my day look like today? When it's a work day, or when it's a home day, or when do you go to the store, or when is it the day for washing your clothes? These are all pieces that you might know, and you follow a schedule. So how do we make sure that the individuals that we are caring for understand those schedules as well and are being communicated clearly? Our middle schedule is for an individual who might need a little bit more clarification for their day. So this is one day, an entire person's day at school. And so then we're looking at what are the different activities that they're doing for this day. This individual clearly can read, and so we don't need to use pictures because they've moved beyond that. But they still need that written out activity of what's going to happen for their day in order for that day to go smoothly. Again, it's about predictability and knowing what's going to be coming next. When is it going to be over? And what's going to happen after that? Our third schedule on the right is the picture schedule. So if you notice, green is what we need to do now, and that's the activity for this small activity. So here we're looking at physical education time. And we want to look at just that activity because the individual needs each component of each activity broken down very step-by-step basis in order for them to understand what the expectation is. And then as those activities are over, you move the picture over to the finished side, the red side, the side that indicates it's done, it's stopped. And then it's very visual, so the individual can watch the activities as they go over to the red side. And then when there's nothing on the green, we know that physical education is over, and it's time to move on to the next piece of our schedule. An individual who uses a picture schedule such as this probably also has another schedule for their day that also has pictures to it. And then they would move to that daily schedule to find out what big activity is next. And then that next big activity would also have step-by-step miniature activities involved so that the individual understands what's expected of them each step of their day. Other ways that we can modify the environment is by making sure that we're sensitive to lighting, to noise, to different odors that an individual might experience, or to personal space. These components and being sensitive to them can often help prevent different challenging behaviors from occurring. Here are two examples of some timers that you can use. This is often helpful in teaching an individual to wait or to know when is something going to happen. Oftentimes, the inability to tell time or to understand time concepts can be a very big contributing factor to behaviors occurring. Think about if you never knew if or when an activity would be done. Think of if you always thought that if you are in something that you don't enjoy, that you don't know what would happen and that you don't know when it would be over. Teaching individuals how to identify when that will occur is very powerful in helping manage and prevent challenging behaviors. So on the left, you see that there's a timer that shows the red is how much time is left. And as the day goes on, the red is eliminated, and then you know when the red is gone that your activity is done. There's also ways that you can create these on your own. You do not need to purchase a fancy timer to teach time. One way that you can do that is making your own red go away timer, and you can move it manually as time goes on. Another way you can do it is by using tally marks as time goes on, or by having a schedule that indicates minutes. So maybe it's 10 pieces of paper, and once you fill up the 10 pieces of paper in kind of a puzzle way, or maybe you remove pieces of paper until there's none left. Very similar to that picture schedule, that red and green picture schedule. You can do that with time as well, but teaching the concept of when is it going to be over and finding a way to communicate that to individuals is extremely effective. Another thing that you can use is just an audible timer and something where you can set it and it will beep when it's over. This picture on the right is an example of that. Other ways that you can indicate that are by using maybe a timer on your phone or a kitchen timer or something that will do a beep. If you don't have any of these technologies, you can also do it on your own by making an audible sound, such as a bell or a ringing noise, or maybe it's a special song that you sing when it indicates that the time is over. So you don't need the technology in order to teach time concepts. A very important thing to remember when you're dealing with addressing challenging behaviors is you have to teach a replacement behavior. Replacement behaviors are the behaviors that the person is going to do instead of that challenging behavior. The word no by itself doesn't actually help to show what the person should not do. It's not enough. So for example, if I'm jumping up and down and the expectation is for me to be sitting in my chair, just saying stop jumping or no, don't do that doesn't actually tell me what you want me to do instead. Oftentimes, an individual hears what you're saying, but they just don't know what to do because nobody's taught them that there's a different behavior that they should be doing. So saying no and stop is just one component, but it doesn't actually teach the individual what they should be doing instead. So we have to teach that new behavior. Some questions that we can ask ourselves when we're teaching a new behavior and teaching a replacement is, what is something that the individual can do that is appropriate for this setting and this situation? How can we use teaching strategies to assist in teaching the new behavior? Because remember, when we're teaching new behaviors, it's just like teaching any other skill. Everybody has to learn to read and to write and to sit in a chair and to follow directions. Teaching new behaviors is the exact same process, except instead of teaching the language or teaching reading, you're teaching a person how to fold their hands or how to be quiet instead of yelling. And you're teaching them a new behavior that they haven't learned before. And often remembering that challenging behaviors are just skills that the individual hasn't learned yet is a nice way to keep things in perspective. We also want to make sure that we have things that are in place that reinforce or show the person that they're on the right track when they use the new behavior that we're trying to teach. We want to make sure that they get the message that you're on the right path, you're doing a great job, keep going. We really like what you're doing and you get really great things that you want when you practice this new behavior. So we want to find out what's going to motivate that individual to change. And we call those reinforcers. So here are a couple of different ways that we can teach people how to communicate. One of the ways that we can show people ways to use different behaviors is by physically assisting them or modeling what we want them to see. A way you can do that is by saying, watch me, and then you do the behavior first and they copy you. Another way that you can use that too is by gently guiding their hand in order to show them how to manipulate a certain activity or item, or to practice maybe folding your hands. And when we're physically assisting, we really want to make sure that we're sensitive to the physical touch and that we're being very gentle. It's not forcing anyone to do something they don't want to do. It's merely assisting them to show them how to do it correctly. We also can teach by pointing or gesturing for what we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to do it. Another way that we can teach communication strategies is by showing pictures. For example, you see this individual handing a card to the caregiver for an orange, and then they receive a physical orange in return because they asked appropriately. Other communication strategies that can be taught are teaching the person how to take a break or how to request, I don't want to do this anymore. Giving them a way that says, I can give you this communication strategy instead of my behaviors and you'll honor it. One way that we've done this is by using a picture. For example, this break please, and then if the person gives me that break picture, then they get a break. And that way they don't need to have a behavior in order to get out of something that they want because they used an appropriate communication strategy. And up front, we really want to honor those communication strategies and make sure that the person is getting lots of success with that new appropriate behavior and has lots of opportunities to practice it and get really good at it, and also see all of the benefits and good things that happen as a result of using that new appropriate behavior. A very important and critical component in teaching behaviors is the ability to understand yes and no. Think of all of the things that can have power in communication if you just said, yes, I want that, or yes, I like that, or no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't like that. Being able to communicate that effectively for your needs, and also being able to understand that effectively when someone else tells you, yes, that's okay, or no, we can't do that anymore. Oftentimes, the concept of yes and no can be difficult for the individuals in our care, and teaching that concept can be very powerful. We also want to make sure that we're teaching a way to say, I'm done, or this activity is finished. That can help communication strategies as well by understanding the concept of things being finished. When we're teaching positive behaviors, we really want to make sure that we're teaching what an individual can do instead. Does it serve the same purpose, the same function? Is it giving them a way to communicate that need in a better way? We really want to make sure that whatever behavior we're planning to use as our appropriate replacement behavior is easier for the individual to do instead of the problem behavior. Again, we just want to make sure that that individual sees all of the success and all of the benefits of using this new appropriate behavior instead of the old problem behavior. So we want to make it very convenient and fun and easy for them to use these new behaviors. We also want to make sure that we plan how to praise that new behavior and make sure that that child knows that this is what we're supposed to be doing and that we are proud of them and that they get good things by doing the new behavior. For example, this visual below shows, yelling, we don't want to yell, so there's no yelling, but what you can do is you can tap my shoulder to talk. And then we can also reference these pictures to the individual as the day goes on. So when we notice yelling, maybe we point to the green picture and say, you can tap my shoulder, and then we wait for them to tap my shoulder. I may also gesture tapping my own shoulder so that they know that that's the behavior I want them to do. And all the while as they're yelling, I'm going to wait to let them to respond to their needs, even though I know all they want is a pencil. I won't give them that pencil until they use that green behavior and tap my shoulder. And I'll do everything I can to help them get to as close to that new behavior as I can. And I'm also going to honor any types of attempts or the person trying to communicate towards that green behavior, because we really want to make sure that that person knows that we want them to succeed as well. And then as soon as they do a close approximation or the correct behavior, depending on what that is, then we want to make sure that they get what they need and that they know it's because of that new behavior. Let's talk about rules for a little bit. Why do we need rules? One of the reasons why rules are so important is they keep control of the environment. They help provide structure so that we know what is expected of us. They keep inappropriate behaviors from occurring, because if we know what we are supposed to be doing, then we will probably eliminate some of the reasons for why we have different challenging behaviors, because we already know what's expected of us because there are rules. Rules also provide individuals with consistent procedures and routines. You know what to expect. We know what's going to happen when we follow the rules. We also know what's going to happen when we don't. Think about walking down a road. We know that there's a specific way to walk down the road. Do you walk on a certain side of the road? Is there a place where people go that vehicles may not go? And what's going to happen if you were to walk in the wrong path or in the wrong direction? What would happen? We know those things because those rules have been established, and that also helps us know how to behave when we're walking down a road. so that we stay safe and that we get to the destination that we want to go. So when you're developing rules, we really want to make sure that we state the behavior we want to see, the positive behavior, and that it's observable and measurable. So we want to make sure that we're telling that individual the behaviors we want. So for example, the rule is to sit in your chair instead of the rule, no running. Sitting in your chair is a much better rule because it tells the individual what they should be doing. It's also a great rule because you can see someone when they're sitting in their chair as opposed to when they are not in their chair. And so that's something that you can show and you can model and you can provide pictures to teach them what sitting in your chair looks like and that that is an expectation. Anytime that you can have shared ownership in the development of the rules is great because you have better buy-in, you have a more consistent ability for everyone to want to be a part of that team and want to be a part of doing those behaviors and following those rules if there's some shared ownership in how those rules are developed. We also want to develop rules that are unique to the individual's need. So for example, if you have a child in a wheelchair, you may not have a rule for walking in the hall because that's inappropriate for that individual. So you want to tailor rules that are unique to each individual's needs. It's always good to keep those rules to a minimum as well. Usually having 6 rules or less is effective because it helps people understand what are the most important things that they need to be considering as they go forward. Here are some examples of some rules. The example on the left is a social story that goes along and has pictures that represent what the behaviors are that you want to see. So this set of rules was developed for a classroom and for a classroom that goes out and walks in the halls very often. A couple of the behaviors that we were dealing with this classroom was we had one child who would run in the halls and we had another child who would yell and they would use bad words to describe other people as they were running and yelling down the hall. And then we had a third child that had a really hard time keeping their hands to themselves. And by that I mean that they would try to push other children. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a keep your hands to yourself rule as well. So let's look at this. There's usually a special way to walk in the hallways. Number 1 rule is we are going to walk slowly. Number 2 rule is we're going to walk quietly. Number 3 rule, say only nice things to each other. And number 4, keep my hands to myself. Now what you'll notice is all of the challenging behaviors that I noted are not anywhere on this page because we want to teach the individual the behavior they should be doing instead. Another thing that we did while we were teaching this classroom to follow the rules is we reviewed this with each of the children and then we took them one by one to practice each of the rules. We also made sure that there were special activities or special items that that individual really liked so they knew when they were doing a good job. Another thing that we did was we made sure to give them lots and lots of praise. Every time we noticed them walking slowly or using a quiet voice, we made sure to point that out to the individual. Oh, I love how you're walking so quietly. Wow, that was such a polite word. Good job. Wow, you're having really nice hands to yourself. I love how you're being so gentle and appropriate standing next to your friend. So we made sure to point out all of the behaviors that were good that they were doing. And we did it often and frequently, especially up front as we were teaching the new behaviors because we wanted to make sure that the individual had lots of opportunity to notice that they were on the right track. And then eventually, as they became more successful in practicing and performing the new behavior, then we were able to back off a little bit and we didn't need to use all of those tools in our toolbox. But up front, we really want to make sure that they know exactly what they're doing, and then we can fade that out as they learn the skill and become more independent with it. The rules on the right are another example of some school rules. So let's look at these. The first one is I listen to my teacher. I put up my hand and wait when I want to talk. I use a quiet voice inside the school. I line up when I'm walking with my class. I keep my hands and feet to myself. I do my work. And I put things away when it's time to clean up. So these are some really great rules that you can use, and they're also really easy to translate into a home or a community environment. So you could change rules for home. I listen to my parents. I ask my mom for help when I need to by tapping her on the shoulder. I use a quiet voice inside the house. I wait to get into the vehicle or to walk to school, and I make sure that I'm near my family before I leave. I keep my hands and feet to myself is always a good rule in any environment. I do my chores, or I put my things away when it's time to clean up. So there's lots of ways that you can translate rules for different environments. Another great preventative strategy is to teach self-regulation. This is an example of how you teach someone what should you do when you're really frustrated or you don't know what to do with your body or you need to calm down. Teaching the tools for how to self-regulate and how to stay calm or how to get back into a calm point after you've become really frustrated and overwhelmed and you're having behaviors or you really want to have a challenging behavior because you need to get that need met. So teaching other ways that you can cope or deal with when things don't go your way is a really effective strategy in preventing challenging behaviors. Some different behaviors that can help to replace aggressive or other challenging behaviors when somebody doesn't know how to cope or how to deal with things that don't go your way could be teaching how to take a break. What does that look like? Where should I go? And what do I do when I'm on a break? How does it benefit me? Using self-talk is another great strategy for self-regulation. This is when you kind of talk to yourself either out loud or inside your own head about, hey, this is going to be a good day, or I need to calm down because I'm really working towards that really great activity at the end of the day. And so I need to stay calm. And so kind of talking yourself down is a good skill to learn. Self-monitoring and making sure, am I doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing? Am I sitting in my chair and folding my hands? Those are ways that you can monitor what are my behaviors and what am I expected to be doing and am I doing them? Teaching deep breathing is a skill that anyone can learn regardless of their ability level. There's different ways that you can model this. You can model by blowing a piece of paper or by blowing a candle or by blowing on your hand and feeling your breath as it blows on your hand. Teaching deep breathing is a great relaxation tool that anyone can learn. Doing relaxation training and practicing how to calm down and what you do with your body and how it looks calm. Different relaxation trainings could include yoga or stretching or tightening your muscles and then relaxing them 10 times. Exercise is also a great self-regulation tool. Going for a walk or a run or doing other forms of exercise is an excellent replacement to the behaviors that can arise from being frustrated with not getting what you want or being frustrated because you need a certain thing and you have to wait. Pushing and pulling heavy items can also be an opportunity. Just getting that, again, it's getting that exercise in and teaching ways that you can calm down independently. So teaching taking a break. A break space is a positive place where an individual can go to calm down. A break space is something that we want that is going to teach a person that there's a time and a place for how you can calm down. We don't want it to be a punishing thing or a bad thing. We don't want it to be, now you're in big trouble and you need to go leave. A break space is something positive that is actually an adaptive, positive skill that someone can use when you just need to take a break. So one of the ways that you can do that is by teaching a clearly defined space for where you take a break. You also want to make sure that you're teaching the break strategy when the individual is calm. And this holds true for any new behavior and appropriate behavior that you're trying to teach. Just think about when you first started learning a new skill. Let's go with first starting to learn a new sport. And were you expected to be the all-star player right off the bat? No, you had to learn step by step by breaking it down and practicing over and over. And that's how you became good at that sport. Teaching a break or teaching any new skill to replace a behavior is the same way. It takes practice, and the best way to practice is when you're calm and when you're ready to listen and when you're ready to learn. And by doing it in small steps and then gradually getting better and better and moving it forward as time goes on and as you get better. Teaching a break or any new skill is the same process. We also want to make sure that we teach the individual how to access a break. For example, they could say, I need a break, or by handing you a picture or a symbol, or maybe by gesturing and knowing that that gesture means I'm going to leave right now because I just need a break. We also want to make sure that we teach the individual the rules for what's going to happen when break is over and returning back to the routine when they're calm. We really want to practice those positive behaviors. Different ways that you can practice positive behaviors are by using social stories or scripts that help describe what those behaviors are. You can also act out that positive behavior and role play. We can write a script or a list for how to perform that positive behavior. We can also provide real-life opportunities to practice in the setting where that behavior is going to occur. So maybe we start practicing in a very small setting and just one setting, but then as we go, we're going to start practicing it in different environments across time and with different people so that they really understand that skill. Let's look at this music. There's different rules and positive behaviors for how you can listen to music. Another way to teach positive behaviors is by using tokens or symbols for what the good behavior is. A person can earn those tokens when they're exhibiting appropriate target behaviors. For example, sitting in your seat. And the tokens represent the behavior that you're wanting to see, and they build up for a bigger prize later. The tokens can be given at certain intervals. For example, after each activity, or every hour, or every 10 minutes. And we really want to give tokens for the behavior we want to see. Again, we want to stay positive and keep focusing on the behaviors we want to see and making sure that person gets lots of great things that they're looking for when they do those positive behaviors. The good job jar is an example of this. We might have some rules that follow along with what we expect. For example, at my house, we have a good job jar for chores and for when my children are following the rules of the house. One of those rules is to be polite and kind to each other. Another one of those rules is to clean your teeth and to get dressed in the morning. Another one of those rules is to follow your chores every day. And every time they do each of those behaviors, then my children get to add a token into the jar. What we use is just little balls that we made out of paper. And then when the jar is filled up, then we get to go out and do something special together. So let's talk about specific ideas for different people that have behaviors for attention seeking. What we want to do to address the behavior of attention seeking in individuals is we have to teach that individual another way to get somebody's attention. So we want to make sure that we give them and practice, this is how you get my attention. For example, if I have a child who likes to hit another person because they think it's funny when they say, ow, So then I'm going to first teach them that if they want to get a really good reaction, maybe we have a new song that incorporates all of the facial expressions and tone of voice that are consistent with somebody saying, ow. And we're going to teach them that it's really fun to get people's attention by doing this and singing this song. We also want to make sure that we know that every time we sing this song, we're going to get involved, because that's how they're going to get attention. Then, as we're doing that intervention, we also want to make sure that the behavior that they used to get reinforced by the person saying, ow, no longer occurs or is less interesting than the new behavior that we're trying to teach. So we want to minimize the reaction that the person gets by minimizing what we do in response to that behavior. Basically, what we're trying to say is, that doesn't get my attention anymore, but you can do this instead. We also want to make sure that we praise correct behavior that occurs naturally. So really making sure that we catch them when they're seeking attention appropriately. Another way that we can do that is by kind of having a schedule for how often are they getting attention. Attention-seeking individuals really need more attention than your average person, because that's what keeps them going. That's what's maintaining their behaviors. So we almost have to be preventative and give them positive attention before they have the misbehavior. And doing that on a routine or a schedule can often be effective in remembering to give somebody enough positive attention so they don't have to seek it out in an inappropriate way. If you have an individual who has behaviors to get out of something or to avoid or to escape something that they don't want, oftentimes using routines and schedules is your friend. We want to tell them the expectation at the beginning of the event or the day. So making sure that they know this is going to happen and these are the steps of what's going to happen. But we also get to teach when it's going to be over, and then putting in processes for how they're going to show how long it's going to take or what they have to do that is in order to be done with that activity. And we also want to make sure that there's something after that activity that they really want to do. So having kind of a non-preferred activity and then having a preferred activity immediately following it so that the individual has something to look forward to is a great motivator for them to just get through that non-preferred activity. We also want to remind the individual of the behavior expectation randomly. For example, let's look at this picture. Oh, we have 5 things to do, and then we'll be done for the day. So, oh, look, we're going to put the number 1 into the yellow box, because that's how we know when that first activity is over. We only have 4 things left. Let's get it done, because next up is going to be our coloring sheets, and I know how much you love those coloring sheets. We also want to incorporate breaks where we can so that the individual can continue to have the stamina that they need to keep going. Using schedules is often very effective for working with people who have behaviors for escape or avoidance. Oftentimes, we want to make sure that they know the expectation, that it's clear, and that they can see what they have to do in order to get it done, rather than it being because I told you so, or because that's just the way it is. Spelling out and structuring what the expectation is and what a person needs to do to be done with it is a great way to teach somebody who has those escape behaviors what's going to happen. And then the big piece is that once you have that plan is trying to follow through as much as you possibly can so that they know that the reason why they got out of the non-preferred task was because they did what they were expected to do. And if you're having trouble with that, one thing that you can do is you can make it a little bit easier to finish. So for example, if we're using the same picture that we're looking at now, and I have a friend who is trying to get out of their seat because they really don't want to do this anymore, I might speed up how long it takes to get all of those 5 pieces done, and I might make it just very quick activities rather than what would typically take us maybe an hour or 2 hours. Maybe I'll shorten it so that it really is only going to take us 5 to 10 minutes. But the point is that we're going to get through those 5 icons, and all 5 of them are going to end up in that yellow box before we get out. Because what I want to teach is that you do the 5 things, and that's why we're done, not because you were trying to get out of your seat. So when we have somebody who's having a behavior for a tangible item or a thing, we want to make sure that that item is structured into their schedule at appropriate times. So if you have somebody that likes to steal food, for example, one intervention that we could place is that they might have a water bottle or a snack that they have available to them anytime so that they don't feel compelled to steal other people's food. Another thing that you can do is something called a first then schedule, which shows them first we need to do this activity and then it's time for lunch. Or first we have to sing our song and then you can hold on to your new book. We want to tell the individual when they can have that item and when it's appropriate throughout their day. We can also use that item as a reward or a reinforcer for doing things that they're not really interested in doing. So first, you do this non-preferred activity, and then you get to take a break with your item, and making sure that they know that it's going to happen and that they're going to get that item sometime, and telling them when it's going to happen and how is often a really great intervention when you have an individual who has a behavior in order to get a thing or an item or an activity. So let's talk about when you're in a crisis. And when I'm talking about a crisis, this is a time where maybe all of your interventions just aren't working today, or maybe there's a danger, a safety concern to yourself or to other people, or maybe you just have run out of all of your ideas. There are things that you can do to help minimize a crisis. One of the things when you get into a crisis is to remain calm. If you stay calm, not only are you modeling and showing other people in the room that you can remain calm, but you also are not contributing to the crisis that's occurring. So by keeping your voice calm and keeping your body calm and making sure that you're quiet and that you're not moving around or running around, also shows people the behaviors that you want them to be behaving. And oftentimes that can help provide a model for an individual in crisis of what they're expected to do. One of the things I might do in a crisis is I'll stop talking. I'll fold my hands and I'll put my gaze towards the floor, just to eliminate anything that I might do that might contribute or make the situation worse. And I'm still aware of my environment, but I also want to make sure that I'm showing what the behavior is I want to see. Again, having that plan. So making sure that we know what we're going to do. If everything fails that we've talked about, what's going to happen if all of these ideas don't work, and that we've planned together what's going to happen, and that we've practiced it and we've written it down so that we know the steps to follow. Another thing that we want to do with that plan is after the crisis, we want to come up with a new plan based on the information that occurred just now in that crisis. Because obviously our crisis plan, if we get to a crisis plan, then our teaching strategies need to be modified because it didn't quite work the way that we had planned. And that's okay. That's going to happen sometimes. It's a work in progress. But what we want to do is make sure that we come up with a new plan based on new information that occurred, so that we're continuing to try to prevent a crisis and to prevent these behaviors from occurring again. Another helpful tip is to talk less. Oftentimes, having all of the noise can contribute to a crisis or contribute to the behaviors and contribute to the environment being less predictable or more anxiety provoking. And so just by minimizing that noise, by talking less, is a great tool and strategy for minimizing a crisis. Now remember what we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. The first skill that can be lost in a crisis is your most recent ability to communicate. So we want to add additional communication strategies into what we're doing with that individual so they know a little bit more about what's expected to them. So maybe we've been teaching a person to use their words and they've been doing really great while they're calm, but then in a crisis, they forgot all of the things that they were teaching, that we taught them. So we want to add in different ways that we can communicate with them so that they don't have to resort to the behaviors that we're trying to eliminate. Another piece that's very important to remember and that can help keep you calm is that oftentimes the behaviors in a crisis rarely have anything to do with you personally. Trying not to take behaviors personally is a really helpful tool in remaining calm and trying to remember, what is this behavior that is happening and what is this person trying to communicate while they're performing this behavior? Keeping that function in the front of your mind and trying to find out why are they doing this and what are they trying to tell me can help make sure that you don't take the behavior personally or feel like it's something that has to do with you. Using a team approach, if possible, is extremely beneficial. Having someone else there, whether it's you going and talking to a colleague or talking to a resource or using your team and making sure that you know other people are in it with you and knowing that you're not alone in this process is extremely helpful in a crisis. A final note is making sure you know your escape routes so that you know how to stay safe. You want to avoid being stuck in a corner or being stuck in a place where your safety might be compromised or other people's safety might be compromised. So making sure that you have arranged your environment up front to be as safe as possible, but also knowing how are you going to make sure that you stay safe and knowing your escape routes and how you can move within your environment to maintain safety is an effective tip in a crisis. After a crisis, we want to make sure that we debrief and that we talk about what happened and we go step by step on what happened and what could we do next time so that we have a plan for next time. This is an example of a debriefing form that you could use. So one thing that we would look at is the event. What happened to make you feel bad? Or what happened that caused the behavior? Sometimes we can use this as a team approach, or if the individual that the behavior happened with can help process or communicate those things, it's often helpful to include them in this process. What was going on? What were the thoughts that were happening and that contributed to the behavior occurring? And then planning for an intervention of what could we do differently next time to try to prevent or seek help at that point before the behavior happened. What were the emotions that were going on? What do you think the person was feeling and what do you think the person was trying to communicate? And then identifying what interventions we could do differently next time so that they get their needs met, again, before those behaviors occur. And finally, what were the behaviors that did happen, and maybe weighing out the pros and the cons of, did you get what you needed? Did anything else happen that you didn't like? Are you happy about what happened? Is everyone else happy about what happened? Or did it not work out the way we planned? And then again, what's the intervention? What can we do differently next time? And what can we practice or plan on practicing so that we don't get into this situation again? These are often helpful in a debriefing after a crisis occurs. So let's talk about how do we get started. A very important thing to remember is we want to keep it simple and we want to make sure that everyone's clear on the expectations for what everyone should be doing. If we get too complicated or if we start to try to bite off more than we can chew, it's not going to be as successful as if we start small and start simple. Making sure that you write things down, that there's a written plan and that everybody is clear on what's expected of each person on the team is very important on how we get started. Not only is writing things down keep things objective so that we remain calm and we stay in the moment, but it also helps as we can reflect back over time on what things have changed and what interventions have been successful and what interventions have not been successful, so we can make better judgments in the future. Breaking big skills into smaller steps is often a great way to get started. Think of when you first learned how to wash your hands. Did you know how to do that? Or when you're teaching how to wash hands, did the individual know what to do exactly as they started? Or did you have to teach one step at a time? So each step was broken down into a smaller step, and then those smaller steps were taught one by one until the individual figured out how to wash their hands in the entire routine. Teaching new behaviors is often as simple as that. We want to break it into small, doable steps that the person is going to feel success and feel like they're doing it correctly before we add on another step or more complicated steps. We want to prioritize what's important and what we want to get done first. So oftentimes the challenges seem so big that they're insurmountable. So we want to make sure that we break it down and be clear about what we want to hit first and what we want to address. When we're prioritizing, there's two ways to prioritize. One may be that we want to address the behaviors that are affecting our safety more than any of the other behaviors. For example, I may have an individual who yells and hits and spits, but I'm going to prioritize the hitting for now because it's really hurting other people and they're becoming injured because of the hitting. And then we'll work on the spitting because that's a health hazard. And then we'll work on the yelling. And we'll prioritize the behaviors and how we're going to address those in those orders so that we're dealing with safety and health first. And then we can deal with the things that are more nuisances or inappropriate to the environment, but they don't pose a safety risk. Another way that you can prioritize is sometimes you can prioritize with what's going to be the easiest to tackle first. And so maybe there's an intervention that just won't take very long and you can get that out of the way. And it's something easy that people can all do and it won't be very complicated. That's a nice way to start too because it helps everybody feel success and see one issue from beginning to end before you start tackling the more complicated issues. So you'll have to discuss as a team and prioritize what's most important for this individual and their behaviors and what would be the best for their long-term care and their independence later in life. We want to make sure that our priorities and our goals are reasonable. We don't want to expect more than the person is able to give us at any given time. So we want to make sure that each member of the team and the individual that we're addressing the behaviors with, that our goals are reasonable and that there's something that we can see happening in the near future. Making sure that everyone is consistent with the plan that is developed is extremely important. Not only does it clarify which parts of the plan need to be modified, but it also says which parts of the plans are working. And everyone doing the same thing all the time, every time, helps eliminate any of the questions of, well, what happened and why did it happen? If we're consistent with the plan, then we can tell very quickly what's working and what's not working so that we can change behaviors in a much more efficient way. We also want to make sure that the plan that we put in place is something that everyone is able to do. Sometimes we set expectations that are just not reasonable to do, that people, despite their best efforts, it's just not going to happen. And that's okay. What's important is recognizing that this isn't going to happen right now and that we're not able to do this. So we need to come up with a different plan that is something that we can do. We really want to make sure that all the people that are going to be involved in supporting and addressing that behavior are on board and part of the team, that you have a commitment to this change. Having everybody have the same commitment to following the plan and that it's meaningful for each person is going to be better and more successful in the long run when you have everyone working together, knowing that they're all working toward the same purpose. We also really want to think about what is the reality of the individual in our care and what are the long-term implications of the behavior that we're teaching and also the behavior that we're trying to reduce. We want to make sure that that individual is as independent as possible and achieving their goals and what's important for them in their life, and making sure that we are teaching skills that can be used when we're no longer a part of this individual's lives. So any skill that we want to teach, eventually we want to make sure that that individual can perform that new behavior without us in any environment at any given time with any given person. And those three things are very important when we're talking about teaching new skills. So if you have any questions, feel free to address them with your resource team, or you can follow up with the outreach ministry, and we'll work to get those questions answered. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.